we are dispatching an action here, and that action has a type of increment. Typically, when using Redux, the goal is to do different things inside of the reducer for different actions. And that's why you get the action as a second argument here. You get the current state and then the action that was dispatched that caused this reducer to run. And therefore, in the reducer, we can of course look into this action. We can check if the action type is equal to increment, for example. And if that's the case, then let's say I want to return this incremented counter. Otherwise, if a different action, like the default initialization action, was dispatched, I want to return the unchanged state, let's say. And that will also change the value we have in our state here, because now for the initialization, we will not increment the counter, but return the unchanged default state. And then for the increment action, we will return the updated counter. So with this little change made, if we execute this file again, we now have counter 1 here, because for the initialization, it's no longer incremented. And we can, of course, also dispatch other actions. We could dispatch an action of type decrement. So with an identifier of decrement. Then we just need to add the appropriate code here. If action type equals decrement. And then just return our new state object where counter is set to state counter -1. Like this. If we do this and save this and run our file again, we have counter 1, counter 0 as outputs. This first output is coming from our subscription after the increment action. And then we change the state again, hence the subscription triggers again, and therefore we now see counter 0 because we decrease the counter here. That's how Redux works. Now there is a bit more to it and more things you can do, but that is the heart of Redux and of how it works. Obviously, we're not using it with React here, but that is how Redux works no matter how you use it. And it indeed isn't a library restricted to React. You can use Redux in any JavaScript project. There even are implementations for other programming languages as well. But of course, here we are going to use it with React though. And therefore, in the next lecture, let's now explore how we would use Redux in a React application. So let's now apply what we learned about Redux to a React application. Attached, you find a simple starting React application, which will bring something like this onto the screen once you run the dev server. And you simply need to download it, extract it, run npm install, and thereafter npm start to bring up that dev server. And in this application, in this simple demo project, I prepared a couple of components which we will use throughout this module. And we're going to get started very simple by transferring this counter example, which we saw outside of React in the last lectures, to this React application. Now for this, actually we can quit the dev server right away and install the Redux package, because we still want to use Redux and I haven't installed it yet in this new project. But Redux isn't the only thing we'll install. We will install that, but as I mentioned, Redux is not React specific. Redux can be used in any JavaScript project, and it doesn't know anything about React and doesn't care about React. Now, to make working with Redux in React applications easier, there is a second package which we should install, the React-Redux package. This is a package which makes connecting React applications to Redux stores and reducers and so on very simple. It will, for example, make it very simple to subscribe components to the Redux store. So you should install these two packages into this React project, and once that is done, we can continue. So once that completed, I will bring up my dev server again, And now it's time to get started with Redux here. Now to get started with Redux in this React application, I will create a new folder in the source folder and I'll name it store. This is not something you have to do, it's just a common convention to store your Redux related code files in a store folder in the source folder. And in there, I'll just create an index.js file. This file name is also up to you, into which I'll put my Redux logic here. Now in there, in the end, for the moment, want to repeat what we did before already. Create a store, create a reducer for the counter, and then not subscribe though. We'll not do that. But we want to create the store, we want to create the reducer. And that's of course also a great practice for you. Without looking at the last lectures, try to create that store on your own and try to create that reducer for the counter, which has an increment and decrement action which is supported. So basically what we did before, without looking at those lectures. Try to do this on your own first. We'll do it together after a short pause, which you can use to pause the video. Were you successful? Let's try it together. We want to create a new store, and for that we need to import something from Redux. Now, since we're back in React, our import statements again look like this now. And here we can import Redux from Redux, or we can also pull out specific things from the Redux library with this import syntax. And we can then, for example, import the create store function. Now, once that's imported, we can call it to create a new store and store that store in a, well, store constant. Now, you did learn that create store wants a pointer at a reducer function as a parameter. So I'll set up my counter reducer here, and that then is a function which gets the existing state as a first argument, and then the action that was dispatched as a second argument. Now we can give this state a default value so that when the reducer is executed for the first time, we have an initial state. And here I'll stick to the exact same state we used before, counter set to 0 in an object. And in the function body of the counter reducer function, we now want to handle different actions, increment and decrement, and then return different state snapshots. So here we can check if action type is equal to increment, in which case I want to return a new object where the counter is set equal to state counter plus 1. Else I check if action type is equal to decrement, in which case I want to return an object where the counter is set to state counter minus 1. Or if we make it into neither of these if statements, I'll return the unchanged state. So the state which I get here, I return that without any changes in that case. So now we can use this counter reducer function and point at that function here in our store when we call create store. This now creates our Redux store. Now previously we did now subscribe here and dispatch from inside this file, and that's now not what we want to do here. Instead now I want to connect my React app to this Redux store so that the components of that app can dispatch and listen. And that's now the new part. For this, I'll start by exporting this store, which we created here, as the default export of this file, so that we can use it outside of this index.js file. And now I want to connect my React application to that store. For this, we need to provide this store to the React app. And since, remember, we only have one Redux store, we only need to provide our store once, the only store we have. The question just is, what does provide mean? to provide our Redux store to the React app, we typically go into this index.js file where we render the entire app. So to the highest level we can go in our React application, to the top of our component tree, where we render this root component. And now here we can import from React Redux. So not from Redux, but from React Redux. And what we import here is now the provider component. This is actually a component. And now we wrap our root component with provider, a little bit as we used our own context provider components, if you recall that from earlier in the course. We also built our own context provider components using React Context, and we wrapped our app or a part of our app with that as well. We're basically doing the same here, and you don't have to use provider on this highest component level. You could also wrap nested components with provider, but only wrapped components and their child components and the child components of the child components and so on, only those components will have access to Redux thereafter. And if the vast majority of your components need access to the store, if maybe your entire app needs access to the store, you should typically provide on this highest level. Now, just by wrapping provider around app, we're not telling React Redux and React, therefore, which store we want to provide. Sure, we only have one store, but that's stored in this index.js file. React Redux, of course, doesn't know that that file holds our store. Instead, we have to import our store from store index in this case. So that's store, which we're exporting in there. We're importing this into index.js. And on this provider, which we import from React Redux, we have a store prop, which we have to set. And this wants a value which is our Redux store. So this store, which we're importing here, we're setting this as a value for the store prop on this provider component. And that now provides our Redux store to this React app. Now on its own, that doesn't do much. Now the store is provided, but that doesn't change anything at the moment. But now our components in this app, the app component and any other child components, can tap into that store. They can get data out of the store. They can set up a subscription to that data, to be precise. And they also can dispatch actions. And that's what we're therefore going to do next.